Is it okay to lust after your wife? In the New Testament, the commonest Greek word for lust is epithemio or epithemia, and is translated as either lust or desire, depending on the context. So Jesus said, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover. Jesus also said, he that looketh on a woman to lust after her committeth adultery. Same word, two different English words in its place. Lust in one context, desire in another. So the use of the English words for the same Greek word depends on context. Everywhere the English word lust appears in the Bible, except for possibly one, it's used to describe sinful desires, and the context of the passage justify its translation. But nowhere do we find the English word for lust used in relation to intimacy and marriage. You can't lust after your wife in terms of the exact meaning of the word lust in English. I was once asked the question, why is fornication wrong outside of marriage but right within marriage? And again, it's a mixing up of terms. Fornication is not just sexual intercourse. Fornication is a sin with someone you are not married to involving sexual behaviour. You can't commit fornication with your wife. You can't lust after your wife. You can have a highly desired and passionate relationship with your wife, but it is not lust in the English sense. You can make love with all the enthusiasm you like, but it'll never be fornication. What turns desire into lust describes the sexual activity outside of marriage. It is not the sex that is wrong, it's the context. So Paul says in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4, marriage is honourable in all and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. To me, lust sounds selfish. It's like you're objectifying someone or something, like viewing pornography, that is lust. It is not desire in a scriptural sense, but unbridled objectifying, what the scripture calls licentiousness. In the New Testament, the word for lust and desire are the same. The context dictates what word is used. So what do the scriptures say about sexual desire? Well, in Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 19, it says, let her be as the loving hind and a pleasant roe. Let her breasts satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. In our readings recently, we've read through the Song of Solomon. It's important when reading that book that we don't let allegory cloud reality. The Song of Solomon is a love song which gives a clear insight into love-making in fairly graphic terms. In Song 7, verse 1, it says, how beautiful are thy feet with sandals, O prince's daughter. Thy rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a skillful workman. He goes on to describe her body in sensual detail, and in verse 10, the bride responds by saying, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. She likes his desire toward her and is happy to yield to it. She is more than happy to receive his expression of desire. It flatters her. It's an interesting point about the Hebrew word for desire in this verse 10. It only appears in three places in the Old Testament. The first is in Genesis 3 and verse 16. Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he will rule over thee. And again in chapter 4, related to sacrifice. And finally, the third place is in verse 10 of Song of Solomon 7. So I find it interesting that in Genesis, Eve's desire is to her husband, but in the song, his desire, the same word, is towards her. The word means a stretching out of arms, a longing. And so the Apostle Paul seems to pick this up in 1 Corinthians 7 when he says that the sexual needs of husband and wife are meant to be cared for one of the other. So husbands and wives should satisfy each other's sexual needs. A wife doesn't have authority over her body, but her husband does. And in the same way, a husband doesn't have authority over his body, but his wife does. The focus is not on our desire, but rather to arouse desire in the other person in a true and passionate encounter that is focused on the other person.